Hello and welcome to Tripping on Legends, episode 135. I am your host, Christopher Balzano, flying 100% solo tonight. I am still desperately on the path to try and find a co-host who can consistently go out with me. So, my daughter, not nearly consistent enough, and, she's great for some of the shows that we do, but actually going out in the field, I require something a little bit different. So if you are interested in becoming my co-host and I'm not flying solo, I'll be doing some episodes that kind of hint at potential legend trips that I want to go on, including tonight's episode, which was not supposed to be like that at all. Feel free to contact me if you are in my area and you are willing to go out to some pretty creepy places and legend trip them. I'm always looking for someone. If this is the first time that you are listening to this show, this is not usually what it is. Please subscribe to the show. Go back and listen to some of the episodes, kind of judge for yourself what legend tripping is. It's kind of evolved over time, and I'm in a good place with it right now. There have been some really weird things that have happened lately that have kind of derailed what I do here. And that's perfectly fine. It's okay to be derailed every once in a while, I think. And then I was talking to, for those of you who don't know, I run the Haunted History Tour through downtown Fort Myers, and I was talking to Gina Taylor, who is the owner of that company, and she said something profound to me the other day. She said, because we were talking about, how do you end your stuff, and tips and stuff like that, and how do you get tips and things like that, and she said one of the things that she always did was she thanked them for the opportunity to come out on the street and talk ghosts to them, or talk history, in her case, a lot of ways, to them, because that's a crazy thing to be able to do. And that's what I've been going with for the last couple of weeks. Like, what I do is pretty insane. Like, I've been given the opportunity to go into libraries and talk to rooms full of people about ghosts, or people are reading my books. There are being an attentive audience. Or I'm allowed to walk around the city, and it's 9 o'clock at night, and I'm talking about, the ghost of a principal who comes back to haunt you. That's a crazy life. So I've decided to keep moving forward with this, because I've got a ton of stuff that I wanted to explore on Tripping on Legends. And so this is the kind of path that I'm going on. However, a legend trip is not a legend trip if you go by yourself. I honestly feel that. So I am looking for someone to kind of come along with me and in this crazy journey, and contact me if you are interested in the job. It's more than just, going to some creepy places. I was signed to write a book called Haunted Southwest Florida, right? Part of the Haunted series, Arcadia History Press, and I was really excited to do it. Pretty much, I wasn't sure I was even going to do another History Press book. And what happened was I started doing that downtown tour, and I had a ton of stories from downtown Fort Myers. And I had a few that were kind of in this area, depending on how you would define Southwest Florida. And so I said, I think I have enough here for a book. And it was totally going to be, I'm speaking in this area a lot. I am, I can get to places a lot easier than I get to places in the Ocala to promote the book. Why don't I just write one? And a few friends of mine have always said, well, why aren't you writing one about this area? And, I have Haunted Florida Love Stories, which is kind of all over the place. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go for it. I hadn't necessarily legend tripped all the places that I had originally planned out, but I was like, I can kind of get over that a little bit, right? Although I think my writing is best when I've been to the place, when I've legend tripped it, when I've deep dived it, when I've rehearsed what I want to say before I write it. If it's something that's been in my mind for a few years rather than just something I explore for the sake of a book. It could be my curse, or it could be my greatest attribute. I'm not sure. But I am an overthinker, right? I do the majority of my life is not only just looking at these ghostly legends, but rolling them around in my head. What do they mean? Where do they come from? What is it? Why is it like other things? And in doing that, I tend to find patterns in haunted legends and in ghost stories that other people might not. And sometimes, like, a little piece of something sticks into the back of my head and kind of works its way through, and then pops up when I least expect it to. So I was working on that book, and I started to notice that one name kept coming up time and time again. And that was the name of Hernando de Soto, who is an absolutely horrific figure in Florida history, in United States history. I mean, it's really one of those things where he is not a nice guy. Like, you hear all the time about the European treatment towards Native Americans. You hear about Spanish conquistadors. This guy is the very definition of that. And he spent most of his time in America, which was not actually all that long, in Florida. And the crazy thing is this. If we take a step back, there is no, I mean, even from the time of his being in Florida, way before Florida was a state, there is no documentation whatsoever that this guy was good for Florida, other than the fact that he helped to bring to some of the places he went to some resemblance of community and settlement. Other than that, he's not the kind of person, even back in the day, like, we can look back and we can say Columbus, kind of became this hero worship situation. And then when you really got to hear all these things about Columbus, you were kind of like, ooh, don't really know whether I want to do that or not. I can't see that there was ever a time where Hernando de Soto was considered anything other than a tyrant. I mean, he kind of made his money and made his reputation, and was even in America, because he had, at a very, very early age, gained this reputation for being vicious. He was what the King of Spain wanted here in America. And so it's unusual to me that, other than a nod to history, that there are so many things in Florida that are dedicated to him, honored of him, named after him. And then I started to notice, because I came across a story a while ago, and I pulled it back up because I kind of remembered it. Was able to find it in my research from something earlier. I think it was when we were doing Fort DeSoto, long time ago. And I went, huh. Like, you hear all the time of these things. There seems to be, and we've played the name game a lot on this show, there seems to be something about things named and dedicated after this guy that resonates throughout so many of the legends that we have tripped on Tripping on Legends, and so many of the ghost stories. And then, kind of like the Bridgewater Triangle, kind of like some of the Ocala stuff, there was a slant towards them, or a lean towards them, where there seemed to be more negative things going on in the places that involved him. And the word kept coming up time and time again when I looked back on some of the episodes and some of the research on some of these places that are in these counties. The word curse kept showing up time and time again. And I thought, this could be a coincidence, or this could just be an idea for us to explore. And I'll give you a great example of this. As I was prepping this episode, I think I was originally supposed to do it. I think I was originally supposed to do it tonight, and then I delayed it because of this. And then I was able to do it. I came across, and I don't even know, I don't know where I had found it. I had printed it out. It was in some random folder. And I came across the name of Genevieve Heigl. Now, there is no one in history that knows who Genevieve Heigl is, I'm sure. Maybe her family knows, right? Like, maybe she has a big following with the people who love her, or people who loved her, I should say. She's got to be long gone by now. But I said it this afternoon in this presentation I was giving in Sarasota. When I showed the picture of Genevieve in her regalia, there were several people in there who knew automatically. I have no idea why my Instagram is exploding on me right now. They knew who she was. Genevieve Heigl in 1916 was the very first Sarah DeSoto. This led me to a rabbit hole. So, if you're not from this area, one of the major cities, especially between where I am and Tampa was like kind of my Tampa St. Pete was my cutoff point to some degree. Really, it was Tarpon Springs and Holiday. And so Sarasota, I really was leaning into some stories that I already had from Sarasota, things I wanted to explore. No one in the world knows exactly why the name Sarasota exists. There's this whole article I found that talks about the ideas behind Sarasota, right? The word Sarasota, it is not a Spanish word. It is not a Timucuan or Calusa word. It's definitely not a Seminole word. And no one can get the exact origin of the word. And there's all these explanations of what it might be and different variations and spellings change. But in 1906, after he had come to Sarasota to vacation and was starting to live here and really wanted to promote, because he was a business owner, the idea of Sarasota being this mythical land, there was a guy by the name of George Kaplan, 1906, who decided he was going to, kind of like the Wauchula Bloody Bucket, he was going to write a fake legend about how Sarasota got its name, and this was the deal. It was actually it was shortened from Sarah DeSoto. So Sarah DeSoto was Hernando de Soto's daughter. And we're going to get into the history of DeSoto, but I want to start with just how easily myth develops around this guy. Now, first of all, I don't know about you, but in, 16th century Spain, I don't know if there were a lot of Sarahs. So automatically, red flag. That and the fact that he's literally saying I'm making this story up. Sarah decides to come with her father to the New World. And so as he is slaughtering people on the Gulf Coast and taking over villages and massacring whole tribes, alongside of him is his daughter, Sarah. And Dad, I love you so much. Like, she doesn't seem to be, in any of the stories, any of the versions of the story, the retellings, she doesn't seem to be upset at all with what her father is doing. She's just kind of by his side. There is a Seminole chief, and he is the leader of the Black Heron Seminoles. Seminoles, keep in mind. 16th century Seminoles. And his name is Chichi Okobi. Now, if you spend any time in Florida, if you are a Floridian listening to this, even if you're not a Floridian listening to this, and you just know about Florida, you can probably tell that the name Chichi Okobi sounds a lot like someone took the word Okeechobee and kind of messed it up a little bit and came up with this new name. Chichi Okobi was a handsome young Seminole leader who fell in love with Sarah. Now, there are two different versions of how he falls in love with Sarah. The first version is that he sees her, falls in love with her, and then intentionally gets himself captured by Hernando's forces just so he can be closer to her. Now, I'm a passionate guy myself, right? That's crazy. He literally surrenders to Hernando de Soto's troops so that he may every once in a while get a glimpse of the beautiful Sarah DeSoto. The other version of the story says that Sarah, Chi-Chi gets captured, he sees Sarah, and he falls in love with her while he's a captive. So he gets captured, then sees her, then falls in love. I probably think that the whole thing is fake, but that sounds like the more reasonable of the two fake stories. That he actually gets captured and then falls in love with her. He falls sick, and for reasons that are never fully given, Sarah, who's now kind of taken a little bit of a liking to him, nurses him back to health. So she helps him heal, right? She helps him. He gets over his sickness, and in the kind of twist of fate that makes me want to never fall in love again, she gets the sickness that he had. Only she can't get rid of it. He tries to nurse her back to health, not working. He then calls upon Hati, who is a great medicine man of the Seminoles from the Everglades. He goes to the Everglades, brings back, he convinces Hernando to let him leave, goes and gets this medicine man, Hati, brings him back to the Sarasota area, and they're both trying to heal Sarah, but eventually she succumbs to her sickness and she dies. Chi-Chi is destroyed by this, as is Hernando. And so Chi-Chi convinces him to let him dispose of the body, let him bury the body in a way that will honor her and then also honor the culture that she died as part of, this Seminole culture, 16th century Seminole culture. He takes her to Sarasota Bay. There are 3 rafts, there are 3 boats. One boat has Hernando and Chi-Chi in it and the body of Sarah. The other have 50 men who are loyal to Chi-Chi. So they're Seminole warriors loyal to Chi-Chi. And then there's a 4th boat kind of trailing them with some Spanish people. They set the boat into the middle, the boat with Sarah in the middle. Chi-Chi gets on one of the Seminole boats. Hernando gets on one of the on the Spanish boat. They light the boat on fire, and they burn Sarah's body along with the boat, and the entire thing sinks to the bottom of what is now known as Sarasota Bay. Hernando, in his grief, turns his boat around, starts going back to the shore. But not Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi makes a signal. All of the 100 Seminole warriors that he has brought along on this trip to honor her take out their machetes. And instead of turning them on Hernando de Soto, who is the man who is, systematically going up the coast, eradicating Native American tribes, they destroy the boats that they are in and allow them to sink to the bottom, killing all 100 of the soldiers and Chi-Chi as well. And the reasoning behind this is that now the spirits of Chi-Chi and the 100 protectors are going to make sure for all eternity that Sarah DeSoto never has to want for anything. She has servants, she has people to protect her, that her soul will be protected from any dark forces looking to attack her or do something to desecrate her ghost. That's the story. That's the legend. And they expand on it because they say that it is this ghost of Sarah DeSoto and these 101 Seminoles who are protecting Sarasota from hurricanes. Kind of like if you've ever heard the episode about Safety Harbor, and trust me, all the episodes that I'm talking about I'm going to post in the show notes, so you can check out any of these stories in detail I'm going to talk about tonight. What is protecting Sarasota, why it does not get hit by hurricanes, so this story comes up every time there's a major hurricane, is the ghost of Sarah DeSoto, and those Seminole warriors who are protecting her rise up from Sarasota Bay and fight back the hurricanes, or at least intimidate the hurricanes to such a degree that they go away and leave that area alone. And if you look out on Sarasota Bay, right? If you look out on Sarasota Bay, they have an unusual amount of whitecaps in their waves. Because it is kind of like this little inlet. And so when the wave comes in, it kind of, those are supposed to be the souls of all of those 100 Seminole warriors rising to the surface to make sure that they ward off any evil spirits who are looking to do anything bad to Sarah DeSoto, or the town that's now named after her, Sarasota. Now, I know that sounds crazy, right? It was written in 1906. The guy didn't have Google to check that the Seminole tribe was not around, in 1539 when Hernando de Soto arrives on, in Punta Gorda. But you had to have known. You had to know that the Seminoles were not, were a fairly new kind of tribe. It took off. This story became like the story of Sarasota. More importantly than the fact that people who are outside of Florida started to believe it, people in Sarasota 100% embraced it, to the point that in 1916 they started the Sarah DeSoto Festival. If you've seen any of the social media that I've put out there, those are actually programs, and this was a week-long event. It wasn't even like ladies' night, right? Like Sarah DeSoto, ladies' night, drinks half off. We're talking the town itself, the city, shut down for an entire week of celebrations of their history based on this idea of Sarah DeSoto being kind of like the founder of that area. There were parades, I remember hearing one account of a whole bunch of kids near the parade kind of marching along with it and not in Halloween costumes or not dressed up, and local stores just giving free costumes or charging like 10 cents for a costume because you had to be part of the celebration going on. Huge. In 1925, so we're talking 9 years after the festival's founding, the charter for the Daughters of the American Revolution, decided to actually call themselves the Sarah DeSoto chapter. Daughters of the American Revolution, named after a figure who never existed, who was in America 200 years before we thought of being our own country, or there being 250 years before the American Revolution. They decided to name themselves, and they're named that to this day. They got their charter in 1925. 100 years later, they're still around, and they're still called the Sarah DeSoto chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. In 1948, the festival itself was taken over by the JCs rather than the town itself. They kind of ran it. So we're talking that is 30 years later, they're still having this festival. 1957, they decide to switch the theme. They're kind of running low on this Native American Seminole theme, and they switch it over to a Scottish theme. So now, for a while, it was to celebrate the influx of Scottish people, and their kind of expanding of the city, and so it became a Scottish festival. And now it's kind of faded out a little bit. As it was then, it no longer exists. So that's all this great lore that's in the background of this, right? But legends have a beginning. Legends have an origin. Legends don't just pop up. Yes, I can understand that story. It was there, it was out there, he wrote it, It doesn't catch on unless something weird is going on. And this is the atmosphere of the Curse of DeSoto. Because little bells started ringing off in my head, and I started I was about to say map questing. I started mapping out some of the places that I had heard about that were extremely haunted or legendarily haunted in Sarasota. And I discovered that almost all of them were on Sarasota Bay. So we can look at it as just a silly legend, but legends gain momentum because real things kind of help to frame them. So if you look at the ghostly legends of Sarasota and what are known kind of for generations as being these crazy hauntings that people talk about, so just literally I could drive and hit all of these places that I'm talking about in about 35 minutes. In addition to, if I'm looking out on Sarasota Bay and I see whitecaps, they're supposed to be the ghosts of Seminoles who are fighting to keep her spirit and her soul, at peace. In addition to that, right, just on Sarasota Bay, we have the Gator Club, which is said to be haunted by, for a while, where the Gator Club is a bar now, but it used to be a hotel. It is haunted by the madam of the house. So in other words, it was a brothel. It was a whorehouse. And she is said to walk the halls. She's said to have a particular affection for males at the club, especially males that go wandering into the darker places of the club. There is also the ghost of a little boy, as well as the ghost of Mrs. Worth, who is the original owner. So this is one of those things where every time they talk about Sarasota hauntings, this one pops up. By the way, I am glancing over most of these because there's going to be an entire episode just about probably each one of these that I decide to legend trip. This is kind of like a little taste, right? Little for free. The next is Rosemary Cemetery, which in addition to having all of your traditional cemetery ghosts, has one in particular that seems to be the focus of darkness. So as I'm going through all these, I want you to note there's a certain darkness that kind of plays out in these that is part of this whole idea of there being a curse on these things that are named after DeSoto. Rosemary Cemetery has the ghost of Ella Green. She was murdered by her husband in 1887. Her and her children were all were all murdered by her husband, and he ended up being convicted of the crime. They're all interred there, and their ghosts are all said to rise. Now, Ella herself walks throughout the cemetery with this deep sorrow that only a mother who has been murdered and along with her children can feel. Walking around the headstones, crying, weeping, and her figure is actually physically seen. Her kids, however, think that death is a blast. Like a lot of the other kid ghosts that are under this umbrella of the DeSoto curse, these kids love to play with each other. They're never seen, but they're heard running around the cemetery, playing with each other, giggling, laughing, pushing things over. Very childlike behavior, but they're never seen. Ella is seen walking throughout, they're not. That is definitely my kind of legend trip. The next one is Conquistador Bay, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. Everyone always corrects me, because we have that at the Sidney Byrne Davis Art Center. We have it at the Witch's Wall, and people are always correcting me. I'm like, I'm from New England. I'm not even sure I'm allowed to pronounce that word right. But Conquistador Bay Beach is right on the tip of Sarasota Bay, and there's a man seen there in black clothes. Now, I'm not sure if this is the same legend of the people who were getting married and the man walks the beach looking for his wife. This one, like I said, these are stories that I came across and was like, oh, wait a minute, I remember this. within the last 24 hours. So I haven't done a deep dive on these. But it seems that the going legend with this one is that there was a ship that got sunk and was all the people on board drowned, although not everyone was ever found. And the ghost is actually a man, this man who walks the beaches, and people see him at night, but they also see him during the day, and he's just kind of walking lost along the beach. I know, Gemma Rose, if you get in contact with this at all, you're going to love this part of the story. He's said to be looking for his dog. So there was he was a chef. He was known for having his dog like there. I'm thinking, like Ramsey, if that's his name from Crimson Tide. Of the bodies that were not found, the dog was not found. So he is said to walk the beach there because he is in search of his lost dog. Great story, and the kind of legend trip people say that they can experience even during the day this guy is seen. There are a few others right along that area, but then I came across my good old friend Keating Hall on the campuses of the Ringling College of Design, and the infamous ghost of Mary. So for generations, people have been seeing this ghost of Mary walking throughout the dorm. She's seen on one particular floor more than others. I think it's the second floor, more than others. People wake up to find her in their room. People have said she is responsible for locking and unlocking doors. Like, she seems to be looking after the girls who are in the dorm, but sometimes she seems to get mad at them. I am going to summarize part of this because if you want to, again, it's going to be in the notes. If you want to get a full dive on how I messed this story up in Haunted Florida Love Stories, you're going to have to explore that. But there was a group that went there led by I can't believe I'm even messing his up, Paul Bernstein, who him and his group went in there to investigate. They got permission from the college to do it. I actually even talked to a woman who had the paperwork that allowed them to go in. This is a very, very long story. I'm going to summarize it because I'm going to mess it up again. And they actually found that the ghost of Mary, and if you watch, there's a ton of YouTube videos out there about her, all that stuff. If you watch, it never exactly describes what she physically looks like. People tend to just say they see her from behind, they see her in a glimpse, kind of like going by. But it's traditionally always thought to be a white woman dressed in black walking through the dorms. But through EVP evidence and a lot of research, Paul's group came up with this woman by the name of Minnie Bell Hughes. You really need to listen to the episode to get all the information. They found her autopsy report. She was officially labeled her profession as an undresser, which was a euphemism for a prostitute. So again, the hotel known as the Bay Haven Hotel, that is now Keating Hall, was known as a place where there was a lot of prostitution and that stuff going around. Essentially, classic story. She has a regular customer. She completely falls in love with him. He is claiming that he's in love with her. She gets pregnant, and she wants to keep the baby, and he leads to her death in one way or another to cover up not only having an affair, but having an affair with an African-American woman. They found a ridiculous amount of information about this woman, including the fact that her autopsy was written in 2 different pens. So someone went back and changed details of the autopsy, and one of the things they changed it, like the additions to the autopsy report, some of them were done in ballpoint pen, and ballpoint pen didn't exist when she died. So I want you to go back and listen to that episode because me explaining how I messed up telling the story is not only humbling, but it really hits at just the kind of crazy stuff that happens under the umbrella of the Hernando de Soto curse. So let's talk about what this actually involves. De Soto was born in 1497 in Spain. He kind of made his reputation helping out, I believe it was Pizarro, in Nicaragua and Peru. And at a very young age, like in his 20s and 30s, he had already gained a reputation of two things. He had gained a reputation of being relentless and ruthless, but also being really sly. There are a lot of stories when his journals kind of finally came out, as they were discovered after years, that he had the power to seduce the people that he was ultimately going to take over. Initially, many of the tribes, and we're talking mainly Timucuan, right? These were Timucuan people who he was going through, or the Timucua. They had this kind of vision of him as a god, and so they allowed him in. But eventually, people are learning that he's not a god, right? And in doing this and kind of going through these tribes, now, if you know the history of Florida, pretty much the Spaniards come here and they hear the language that the Native Americans are speaking. And they assume they're all in one big tribe. Like that all of kind of south, basically Calusa on up to the Panhandle, they assume are all the same tribe because their language sounds similar. And so they label all of them Timucua. That would be the equivalent of me going to Europe and hearing Italians, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and assuming that they were all the same country because they all come from Latin American languages and they all kind of sound similar. And I don't understand any of them. Oddly enough, this is a belief that's held and it kind of sticks, even though they have translators. They have translators who can clearly tell the conquistadors and other people coming here that these people are not from the same tribe. And there is a little bit of breaking up and identifying them later. But in the 1500s, or I should say the 1600s, when he gets here, that's not happening. All these people are labeled Timucua, so it's really hard to discover where exactly he was or what tribe he was actually interacting with. He gets here, so he is a destroyer of people, but also like really sly and slick, and people actually like him, and they invite him in, and he befriends leaders, and then goes behind their back and wipes them out. He lands in Florida in 1539 with 600 men and 200 horses. There's a lot of argument as to where he actually landed. Some people believe it was in Sarasota Bay or up near Tampa. The Manatee River is often identified as like a place where De Soto originally landed. Pretty much, though, the strongest theory, which has been backed up time and time again, is that he lands in Charlotte County. He lands in Punta Gorda in Charlotte Harbor. That's where he touches down. He then ravages his way up the Gulf Coast, pretty much at ease, and he's kind of slaughtering and conquering as he goes. Those 600 men, well equipped for the day, were more than enough. Now, the interesting thing is, he never went south, right? The Calusa had such a reputation that everyone was like, whatever you do, do not go south. Do not go south. Like, that is a fight you do not want. And which kind of fits into a lot of the different Calusa legends of just how tough they were. Instead, he goes up the state and he's going kind of village by village, nation by nation, kind of taking over all of these different places until he gets to this place which is now called Live Oak near Tallahassee. This is a place that, for whatever, kind of still exists to some degree. However, what you're going to see is that nothing to what it should be. When he gets to Tallahassee, or when he gets to Live Oak, I should say, he decides that they kind of know he's not a god. They decide to go with a different tactic. So the best that I can understand and kind of interpret from the different stories that I was able to research, the Timucua of that area have several different chiefs, probably because they're not from the same tribe. Several different chiefs, and there's one chief who kind of unifies them, almost like, this guy's going crazy through this place. We need to stop him. We have to join our forces. And so these 7 different tribal leaders kind of bring all of their forces into this place known as Nipatuka. And it's on the Swanee River. And they decide that they're going to slow play DeSoto. So they are kind of playing it as if, oh, hey, we just want to be friends. DeSoto's playing it as in like, hey, we just want to be friends. And it's crazy because both of them have double agents in each other's possession, right? Like, they all know that no one is there for peace. DeSoto starts to kind of have his men surround. He has some men hidden off. The Timucua have, like, they're kind of all these like different encampments and stuff like that, and they're positioning themselves until finally, like, they just have to fight, right? And so they have this battle that's called the Battle of the Ponds. And even though the Spanish are greatly outnumbered, they're not outgunned. And so they wipe out all but 200 of the soldiers that are in that area. It's called the Battle of the Ponds. The surviving ones run into a swampy area that's around there, and they won't come out, and DeSoto won't go in. He's like, they have to come out at some point. And so we're just going to surround this swampy area, and we're going to wait. And so these 7 tribal leaders kind of all get together, and they say, we have to give up. Like, we can't win this. We have to give up. And so the 7 leaders kind of all come out together with their men behind them, and they surrender to DeSoto, who promptly goes about executing all 200 of the soldiers and the 7 leaders. As that is happening, the very last one says to him, I put a curse on you. You will never find peace in this land, and everything you touch will turn to darkness in your hands. Pretty specific. DeSoto kind of laughs it off. The man is executed, and he is claimed an amazing victory, turns left and starts to take off into the Panhandle and beyond. He is dead less than a year later. DeSoto is credited as being the first European to glimpse the Mississippi River. And on the Mississippi River is where he dies. He contracts what they believe is yellow fever, but it was definitely some kind of fever. Now, the people that were in that area hadn't really gained too much pre-knowledge of his coming, and so they still thought he was a god. So the people who were going to have to deal with these tribes in that area post his death, they didn't want it to get out that he wasn't a god, that he was, mortal somehow. And so they set his boat on fire. Sound familiar? Pushed him out into the middle of the Mississippi River, and his body burned, and the ashes fell into the Mississippi River, and he never had a righteous or Christian burial. Which is crazy, because there are at least 6 different places, all said to be haunted, that are said to be the burial place of Hernando de Soto, but in actuality, he had pretty much a meaningless death. In the middle of the water, they just pushed him out, burned his body, so that they could continue to kind of go on with the illusion that if these tribes decided to fight against them, the ghost, the dark spirit of DeSoto, would fall upon them. And it was convincing because he was vicious enough in life to kind of warrant that kind of fear. Things don't go well for the Spanish in Florida after that. The settlers who were left at Live Oak had nothing but bad luck. They could not get the settlement going, right? Like, it was absolutely horrible. They would have these settlements that would rise up, and then they would either storms would destroy them and only destroy in the area, like the ones that were in there. Tallahassee would be fine. Live Oak, which had different names all throughout history, Ellaville, Bluntstown, like all these different names, all the towns would fail. They had these mysterious fires that would just ravage only that area. And now we all know fires in Florida ghosts have a deep, deep history. Here, nothing was happening to the left, nothing was happening to the right, but that place was constantly being built up and then destroyed again. 1812, Florida becomes a state, and they decide they want to have a state capital, right? They need a state capital. A few different things are kind of put out there as the state capital. Like, there's a lot of infamous stories about how Tallahassee becomes the state capital. But Live Oak, because of its beauty, because of its position on the Swanee River, was a front runner. And so kind of like the Olympic things, like you go and they tour it and they try to put their best face forward and like, look at what an amazing place, look how close it is to this, how close it is to that. So this delegation who is going to be evaluating that area to become the state capital, they're met and they're brought to where kind of the center of town is supposed to be. And they can't find it. The people who had gone out to meet the delegation was supposed to go down the road and show them where it was and show them how they had set everything up. For 2 days, they constantly got lost. It was almost as if they were in some kind of geographical shift, right? Like the area didn't want to be found. Every time they thought it was just over the next plain or just over the next hill or through this area right here, they would get through and they would seem to be in a place that they didn't even recognize. They were never actually able to find the town of Live Oak. And so the people who were the delegation just continued on, and they decided to use Tallahassee, which was right down the street, instead for the state capital. For more than a year now, I have had this on my phone. Someone made me take a picture of a Wikipedia page because they were talking to me about this. I think it might have been at the Ocala Bigfoot convention, which is like this weekend or next weekend. So it was probably about a year. The Battle of Alusti. It was the major battle that happened in the Civil War in Florida. Happened in this area. You can look throughout the history of Civil War battles fought in Florida, and it's kind of mediocre. It's lame, not lame, but it's kind of like not a lot Civil War happened, right? We were too busy and devastated from the Seminole Wars to have a lot of fighting going on, and like, who was going to fight for Florida? Right? It was way too far away to control and to send troops down to. So there wasn't a ton of fighting the way there were in other southern states. In the Battle of Alusta, 3,000 people died. That is by far the largest number of people who died in the Civil War in Florida. Now, I heard April 5th is the convention. I heard, and I don't know if this statistic is true, but more people died in that battle than died in the Civil War throughout the rest of the Civil War in Florida. I've heard that said more than once. So that's a crazy number, and it's part of this whole curse of DeSoto that happened here. when you can hear something as weird or as bizarre as a curse and go, yep, makes sense to me, right? Like, if it makes sense to you, if you can see it, if it is rational to you, then there might be something to it, right? If you hear all the time, oh, I'm cursed, I have to work overtime, well, maybe not so much. But if you hear the same kind of dark stories coming out of the same area or related to the same kind of thing, and you hear the word curse, the litmus test for that is if it feels right. Because you can't research these things. We believe in curses, and curses have an impact on us because there is a part of us that believes that it is true. There's a part of it that makes sense, that someone gives us the evil eye and can impact, or that something so horrific happens. This is the constant battle with the Bridgewater Triangle over whether or not King Philip's War caused a curse on the land, or whether there's something dark there, and the King Philip's War is a symptom of that. I'm obviously in the latter way of thinking, right? I don't believe that it caused the Bridgewater Triangle. I think it's a symptom. But it's that same kind of thing. Like, it makes sense to us because weird things or bad things are constantly repeated. And whether it's our intent on it and our idea on it, that we just then tend to make all these connections, and so therefore it seems like the same things are happening in the same places, or whether it's an actual thing and we're just observing it and noticing it, we give a curse power, and then through that we also allow it to impact us. That makes sense to us. In Florida, there were really these massive stretches of land, because so much of it was uninhabitable for so long. There were huge stretches of land that were considered counties. So probably the biggest county in Florida was Manatee County. So Manatee County was pretty much like everything from before Tampa to Lee County, which didn't exist yet. 1887, they break that up into two different counties. So now we have Manatee County, and then we have the newly branded DeSoto County. The number of legend trips that I have touched upon that come from what used to be, or as they called it, they now call it Old DeSoto County. I always joke that 17 is the haunted backbone of Florida. Like, you can drive 17, get out anywhere, and say, where are the ghosts around here? And you're going to be pointed to a ghostly legend or a haunted house. Like, it's that impactful. 1921, they break up DeSoto County into all of these other counties. This reads like a greatest hits of Tripping on Legends. And I am going to allow you to go back and listen to these episodes. I'm just going to say some of these places, and you'll see just how much this covers. So, you obviously, Old DeSoto County becomes DeSoto County. So we have all the kind of, we'll talk about that in a sec. You then have Hardy County. Hardy County is probably most famously known for Wauchula. And we all know the story of Bloody Bucket, the Bloody Bucket Bridge. Bowling Green, I have not explored Bowling Green yet, although everyone seems to tell me that it is an extremely haunted town. You have Highland County. Highland County has Avon Park, and the 5 or 6 legends that we've talked about in Avon Park. It has Sebring. We did an entire episode on the Kenilworth Lodge. That is in Sebring. And then, of course, the golden jewel of Highland County would be Laredo, Florida, and the ghost of Arbuckle Creek. Probably one of my favorite legends that we've ever done. We also have Glades County. I haven't explored too much in Glades County yet. I'll have to look into that. But Charlotte County. Charlotte County, of course, Punta Gorda. And we have the infamous Indian Springs Cemetery and the kind of... So what distinguishes some place that how many of those things have we had? The curse of the bloody bucket, obviously the curse of the Arbuckle Bridge. In this Punta Gorda, and you find it in another one of these Hernando, another one of these DeSoto areas, you have this idea that especially cemeteries are cutting into some kind of animalistic area, right? Like there's something dark and sinister, but then also kind of like elemental might be the best word for it. So if you've heard our Indian Springs, or if you've ever been to Indian Springs, you will hear growling coming from the woods. So you are in the cemetery itself, and you hear this growling coming from the woods all around you in Indian Springs at night. And you see these kind of dark figures hopping from the woods into the cemetery. Now, it's not an animal, right? It sounds like a human making animalistic sounds. Like it's got this kind of guttural human feel to it where you don't have that in other cemeteries. If you get it enough, like it is a common theme in some cemeteries, when you hear it, it's one of those things that your ears perk up because that's... In Indian Springs, they think it has to do with this supposed serial killer who's buried in the mausoleum. And so you pass it off as being something like natural. But you hear it enough in these cemeteries that you have to think that there's something else going on. So many of the cemeteries that fall under this umbrella of the Curse of DeSoto have that growling coming from the woods. Then, of course, you have to look at not only his last name, but his first name. Oh, but by the way, DeSoto County itself, right? Like, before I get into the first name, the county seat is Arcadia. Do I even need to go on about Arcadia and the craziness that's in Arcadia and the haunted darkness that is Arcadia? We all know the Heard Opera House has this dark history. As I was promoting this episode, I showed a picture of the neighborhood near where the orphanage in Arcadia used to be, with the kind of tagline of, if you want to know the most haunted neighborhoods in your area, look for the Haint Blue. There are parts of Arcadia that every single window and door of a house is either painted blue or they have blue all around them. There are, and I would not go so far as to say the imagined folklore backstory of dead kids from an orphanage is not dark and sinister. Like, that is, even though we know it's not true, that backstory is pretty dark. But the nature of the hauntings in the Heard Opera House, while some people have kind of talked about the idea that it's, you know, there's poltergeists, you don't necessarily get a feeling of darkness. It's mainly because I think you associate the majority of those ghosts that are there as children. I'm not saying that that's, you know, children can't be dark or that kind of haunting can't be intense. But there's something almost playful about the majority of stories that come out of the Heard Opera House. And even you can say Oak Ridge Cemetery. It's the same kind of thing because you have a statue that talks to you, a flag that disappears, and 7 children who want to play hide and seek with you in that cemetery. Coker has a little bit of a darker feel. Even those are supposed to be the children. I'm now, and you can go back and listen to the Lots and Lots of Lots episode, I'm not entirely convinced that what is in Coker Cemetery are the Lot children, and I'm also not convinced that it's a good thing. or it's even necessarily a human thing that is in Coker's Cemetery. So obviously, if you're talking about haunted towns, just solely haunted towns, if I talk to people like what is the most haunted spot in Florida, and they want you to tell you St. Augustine, Arcadia, Florida, is right up there, if not beating some of the towns that surround the Ocala. Arcadia, I'm just going to quote Pamela right here. Arcadia is crazy haunted. And when I talk to people who work as paranormal investigators, they always say the darkest places that they investigate, that they know it's going to be more intense and it's going to have a sinister feel to it, Arcadia, Northport, and Edgewood. Like, there's a coincidence. All those places are connected by something. How about the first name? Right? So if you've heard me speak, and if you know anything about me, you know that my obsession is Pemberton Ferry, and I've been researching just the and it's going everywhere, and I want it to go everywhere. The craziness of the history of Pemberton Ferry, This Town is Myth, is that project, and Pemberton Ferry is a town that failed. It is separated by the most lethal body of water in Florida. Even more deadly than Lake Istapoca, the place where people die. Lake where people die. And that's the Withlacoochee, right? More people have died in that water, documented and not only a lot of people died, crazy deaths on there. I was told that you cannot find a person in either of those towns, either in like what is now Bushnell, Florida, or across the way from the river in Brooksville. You cannot find people who do not know somebody who died there. It's like a friend of a friend. Like everyone has at least one person they know that's less than 3 separations from them. That's 3, I should say, 2 or 3 separations from them that has died in that body of water. Like that's how intense it is. One side you have Pemberton Ferry, Sumter County. No one talks about ghosts. On the other side you have Brooksville, where it seems everybody wants to talk about ghosts. And obviously the kind of crowning jewel of Brooksville would be the May Stringer House. I am not exaggerating when I tell you at least 7 different people who do not know each other sent me either TikTok videos or reels this week, like in the last 10 days, about the May Stringer House. Brooksville and the May Stringer House is inside of Hernando County, named after Hernando de Soto. Now, the crazy thing about Hernando County is it was originally called that, and then it changed its name, right? It changed its name to Benton County. Benton was the name of the congressman or senator, I can't remember which it was, that decided to put forth the Armed Occupation Act, which so many of the places in Florida were built up by this idea of, if you, in 1856, if you build your home, if you're going to build a home, if you're going to actually, I'm sorry, not in 1856, before then, if you're going to cultivate the land, if you're going to own guns and help us against the Seminoles, you can have these vast tracts of land. So many of our legend trips kind of fall into this Armed Occupation Act. It hits it somewhere along the line, right? That the person gets the land from the Armed Occupation Act. They thought that was a great idea. And so they very quickly changed from Hernando County to Benton County. And then that politician, they discovered, was anti-slavery. And there was no way they were going to align themselves. I believe it was from South Carolina. I could be wrong in that. No way they were going to align. That might be Brooks, who's from South Carolina. No way they were going to align themselves with that, and so they changed the name to Hernando County because Hernando de Soto was so much more in line with their belief system. The May Stringer House, I'm sure you've heard of it. If you're listening to this show and you're into Florida ghosts, you know about it. 1856, this home is built, 160-acre tract of land. It is a man by the name of May buys it. 1868, the first child dies. 1869, the wife dies, I believe in childbirth. And then in 1872, Jesse dies. And he most likely died of yellow fever, but the going story is that he died of a broken heart when his mom died. In the 1880s, Dr. Shelton Springer moves in, and kind of that's why it's known as the May Springer House. In the 1960s, it was rental properties. In the 1981, it was saved from being torn down. People say this is the most haunted building in Florida. There are very few people who do what I do in this area who don't know the May Stringer House, and pretty much anyone who's into ghosts, one of the first things they ask me is, have you been to the Stanley Hotel? I don't know why people still ask me that. Have you been to the Stanley Hotel? Have you been to St. Augustine? And then the third question is the May Stringer. And from what I understand, there are very few people that go there that don't have something happen. Pamela, for example, says the attic has something dark, and the one school room, a ghost walked right past me. However, I never saw anything. I just heard it. Everyone who goes there seems to have a story, and if they don't have a story, they have a level of disappointment that they went there and they didn't have something, but someone in their group had something happen. Cries are often heard there. Items are moved. Jesse is supposed to be the most frequent ghost that is felt or seen there, and he appears and he loves to speak to children. So if you're going to the May Springer House, make sure you bring your children with you. The sound of children's walking is heard on floorboards, so it must be like a gentle walking. Tea settings, toys moved, baby shoes moved. There's also a man in uniform. So Jesse is the most frequent ghost, but there's also a man in uniform who's thought to be Dr. Stringer's grandson, who served in World War I. And then classic story, he comes back and the woman he was supposed to marry found another man. And so he killed himself in the May Stringer House. And if you have enough money, you can go and investigate it and spend time there. And I don't want to poo-poo the May Stringer House, just in the same way, the Heard Opera House, but it's a lot of people know about it. A lot of people have done it. I always wonder when people start to investigate a place en masse, does it change the nature of the haunting? Well, it changes the nature of the people who are running it and who are promoting it. But does it actually change the nature of the ghosts that might be there? I've often said, right, if ghosts can move, if they're not confined to a place, I'm going to go to the place where all the ghost hunters are going, right? Like, I'm going to go to the place where people are walking around with equipment and microphones and asking if I'm there because I can get the attention that I so desperately seek, if that's what I'm looking for in death. I have no problem with pre-packaged paranormal events and things like that. It is not my cup of tea, especially. It never really was. Like, the closest to that for me would probably have been the Lizzie Borden house. Like, I was a big fan of that. But I never paid to stay at the Lizzie Borden house. It is considered one of the most haunted places in Florida, and people I respect have had experiences there. Pamela says that she felt something dark in there, which is more what you get when you step outside the May Stringer House. Because Spring Hill Cemetery and so many other locations in Hernando County have a different feel to them. It's really interesting because Hernando County and Brooksville in particular really promote themselves as being haunted. They're kind of like the Rehoboth of Florida. But the majority of the real haunted legends that come out of there, they don't promote. There's at least 2 different hanging trees in Brooksville that are known for their hauntings that were the sites of either lynchings or hangings without a full trial. And people have known that. But then you have Spring Hill Cemetery. Spring Hill Cemetery, we actually went. It's funny, it came up. We went there, I think 3 years ago today. My kids and I were in this cemetery. It is the least welcome I have ever felt in any legend trip that I've ever been. We were not welcome in that cemetery. It is, I don't mean primarily, it is like pretty much strictly a African American cemetery. Kind of in the 1850s is when it's built. Like some of the headstones go back to the 1850s. And it was a burying ground for Civil War African Americans who died in the Civil War as well. It was actually called the Civil War Cemetery. However, the story goes that Spring Hill has become the kind of place that it's almost like mocking the culture that it's meant to honor. As the KKK started to rise in this area of Florida, it was used as a dump. There was a woman who was murdered and left there. People have actually had lynchings there, like the KKK had lynchings there. There's this one absolutely beautiful tree, and it's said that the KKK in that area had a habit of when they gathered people up, they would bring them to that cemetery and hang them from this tree. And it was a mocking way of saying, like, oh, this is your cemetery? We're making sure that this one doesn't have that long of a drive to get here. Like, it was that kind of attitude. When you go there at night, you are very likely to see a dark figure hanging from the tree. You actually see it swinging back and forth from a rope. People have actually even seen it during the day. There are cries. Some people have seen a whole bunch of spirits huddled around one particular plot. No one's ever able to say, like in the reports of it, like what plot it is of all of these. One of the crazy things is that there is one patch of headstones, and keeping with tradition, all those headstones are facing east, and then there was one facing west. After we went there, so after today, 3 years ago, we went there, because I actually live, I'm like, what is going on with this? We discovered that he was actually the Baptist minister in that area, and they buried him facing west, not as a sign of a witch like some places in Florida, but because he was preaching to his people. So he was actually physically buried so that his headstone would be facing his congregation, which is a really cool idea, right? Except one of the ghostly legends I then discovered was that that headstone disappears at night. And that minister can be heard kind of in this very low tone, almost like the volume is turned all the way down, preaching to his people in that area of the cemetery. One of the craziest things that is a ghostly legend there is the idea that whatever is there, and it's not thought to be people, whatever is kind of in that area growls at night, just like in Indian Springs, only the growling is much more frequent, much more intense, And unlike in Indian Springs, where certain hauntings or certain ghosts that are in that cemetery seem to fight back against that, no one fights back this. It gets louder, it gets intense until you eventually go crazy and leave. One of the things that people have reported is that their car will be pushed. Now, we all know in your area, wherever you might be, there is Spring Hill. I warned you about going to Spring Hill, so it's your own fault. I literally gave you a warning, Lorianne, about moving to Spring Hill. Sorry, just had to interact with someone on the live. We all know where these gravity hills are, right? We have Spook Hill here in Florida. There's pretty much every state has one where you think you put it in neutral, you think you're being, going up a hill, but you're actually going down a hill because of an optical illusion. And almost always those places are associated with ghosts. There are ghosts there as well. Oftentimes they're the ghosts of little children who push you across because they died in a horrific accident, being hit by a train that never existed. That's not what is in Spring Hill. In Spring Hill, it is flat ground, right? Coming in from, it's basically a hidden cemetery. Coming in from the road, leaving, there's one way in, one way out kind of situation. If you don't know the cemetery is there, that little green sign that tells you it, you're probably going to go, it's hidden, it's in the middle of nowhere. And whatever is in there doesn't want you to come in. And so if you stop the car and you put it in park, not neutral, but in park, you will actually feel the car start being moved towards the direction of one of the entrances or exits. When I went there with the kids, we were going to have a picnic there, right? Because we were hitting all these different places, and so I'm like, well, let's eat in this cemetery. I've gone with my kids to probably 24 different haunted locations. Always like low end kind of things, that aren't too intense, and always during the day. Almost always during the day. They didn't even want to get out of the car. I didn't tell them any of the background of this. I was going to wait till we got there and kind of tell the stories while we were there. They were like, Dad, we don't like this place. Like, we want out of here. Take us away. Take us home. We don't want to be. It was crazy. I've never had my kids react that way to a place. We get out. We walk around the cemetery for probably, I'm not even kidding, 35 minutes. Like the shortest amount of time that I've ever been in a location if we are kind of legend tripping it. We decide to leave, right? They definitely want to just get us out of here, Dad. We go to pack up the car. I put the stuff in the trunk. I close the trunk door, and that's when I see that the entire back bumper is covered in handprints. Now, I had unpacked the stuff when we got to the place, didn't notice any handprints. There are actually pictures on my social media of the kids and I at the car, like, hey, we're here in the cemetery, blah, 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 blah. Nothing. As we went to leave, handprints all over the back. And so some people, when I originally posted it, were like, yeah, but all that dust, because it's dirt roads, that's perfectly fine, like, except for the fact the handprints weren't there when we pulled in. So when we were actually driving through the dust, and then stopping, and then loading, nothing. There is definitely something dark in Hernando County. And by the way, I haven't even touched upon, for the sake of, if you know, a lot of the other things that go on in that area. You'll have to wait for the book, I guess. And then, of course, one thing I forgot to mention was that, which if you follow me, you kind of know, because I've done this before in an episode, the original Fort DeSoto was built in Hernando County and immediately failed. So they built the entire original Fort DeSoto, and then it ended up that they built it on phosphorus mines, and so they couldn't get to water, and the water they could get to was poisoned, and so they had to abandon it. Which, of course, gives us Fort DeSoto itself. If we're playing the name game, and we're talking about sadness and sorrow, we have to talk about Fort Inconsequential. And I'm not going to get too much into this because we have multiple episodes on Fort DeSoto. Everything from the flirtatious fisherman, which Natalie couldn't get to flirt with her, to the soldier who washes up on the shore and then collapses. For those of you who have never heard the Fort DeSoto episodes, once again linked in the show notes. I call it Fort Inconsequential because it never shot its guns in battle. It never defended anything. It was set up to defend Egmont Key, the fort at Egmont Key. Nothing ever happened there. It was a punishment. The weather conditions and the living conditions in Fort DeSoto were so horrible that it was a punishment to be sent there. Like, you better be a good soldier. You're going to Fort DeSoto. And so it ended up that it went from all of these soldiers from like a fully activated base to half of them being cut, to another half being cut, to eventually there were like 5 soldiers left, and it became a nature preserve. And the soldiers were just there to say that it was still an active base and to watch the herons that were flying around. Then eventually those soldiers come, and it was for the longest time a quarantine for people coming into Tampa Bay. And that's really where a lot of the stories of sadness come in. I'm not going to get into the story of the mother. I've told that story a ton. You can go back and listen to those episodes. It is the most heart-wrenching paranormal experience that I've ever had, and the one that I used to jokingly say was going to kill the show, and then it did kind of kill the show for a time. And of course you have Fort DeSoto is also the site where from the edge of it, looking out, you can see all of the people jumping off the Skyway Bridge, and they disappear before they hit the water. Some kind of psychic echo of the tragedies that happened on that bridge, as well as the collapse when the Skyway Bridge collapsed. As the bodies were being discovered in the water, they were brought to Fort DeSoto and held in the hospital, in the morgue of the hospital, where the woman is still looking for her children. Same site of sadness. And it just, for more than 100 years, has been the site of constant disappointment, sadness, darkness, unexplicable things going wrong. So on one end of it, we have this total failure of town after town after town that tried to grow in the shadow of Hernando de Soto taking it over up there in Live Oak. On the other end of the extreme, we have places like Fort DeSoto, which are constantly being built up. Laredo or Lorida, Florida, failed city. The ups and downs of a place like Wauchula. The ridiculous amount of hauntings, and also economic and disaster, natural and not natural disasters that have hit places like Arcadia. It's not as if these things exist or don't exist outside of things that feel the shadow of DeSoto. But those that are in the line of fire seem to experience them more. And so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't put an eye to those places and start to see the same kind of story time and time again, not in a folklore kind of way, not in a we enjoy themes or we fall upon motifs, but in history repeating itself time and time again because of similar circumstances. And those circumstances can often be sinister. So I highly encourage you, go through. You can click through these show notes and you'll have an entire playlist of the best of Tripping on Legends, and you can explore things like the Bloody Bucket and Fort DeSoto and the full story of Arbuckle Creek, and a lot of these places, our trips throughout throughout Sutner and Marion County, Hernando County. I encourage you to go into the archives, dig out some of that stuff. Tell us your stories, like get in contact with us. You can contact us via email at spookytripping@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/trippingonlegends and Spooky Tripping on Instagram. We are Tripping on Legends on TikTok. I post a lot of little videos, not only about these random connections that I'm making, but also my explorations throughout downtown Fort Myers. And I have to put a plug in for True Tours. If you are in this area, I highly encourage you, come to downtown Fort Myers, check out the history, check out the spooky with me. You can do that at truetours.net. And until I come up with another connection, I already know the next legend that I'm doing, and it's a nice haunted legend on the other coast, so well out of the framework of DeSoto. I already have it planned, so make sure you're subscribing on all these different platforms so you can hear the new episodes when they come out. And until I am able to speak with you again, I am Christopher Balzano, and here's hoping that all of your trips are legendary.